Tech Mahindra is one of the India's top 5 largest IT service and consulting companies, and in the coming year they are all set to hire more than 6,000 freshers. Every year these big service-based companies do the majority of freshers hiring, and 2025 is not going to be any different. So if you are in the final year of your degree and want to make a career in IT irrespective of your background, Tech Mahindra is the company that's going to provide you with the equal recruitment opportunity. To help you make the most out of this opportunity and get yourself placed, we did a thorough analysis of Tech Mahindra interview procedure. And I'm 100% sure that if you follow the tips covered in this video, you can clear all the recruitment rounds. But before we do that, you can click on the subscribe button to come across more job preparation or tech related contents from Intellipaat. Now let's look at recruitment process, which consists of 5 rounds. Round 1 is an elimination round that consists of a written test that is used to evaluate a candidate's aptitude and technical skills, which contains the section of aptitude, essay writing and technical test. This includes logical reasoning, quantitative aptitude and verbal ability. To get yourself prepared well, practice regularly on platforms like MCAT, CoCubes and Mercy Metal. They provide real-time environment which will help you comfortable with real-time constraints. Round 2 is a psychometric test which is optional and is used to assess your work behavior. Round 3 is again a technical test that is intended to assess a candidate's technical abilities and aptitude, in which you would be asked questions related to data structures and numerical abilities. Now last but the most crucial round is the interview round, in which you will be asked questions from DSA and all the core subjects, and you might face questions from your resume. This is the phase where a maximum number of freshers get rejected. But don't worry, because in this video we will propose to you the most commonly asked 30 interview questions by the recruiters of Tech Mahindra. See, the most important concept while interviewing freshers are DBMS, OOPS, networking, operating system and data structures. If you are clear with these fundamental blocks, your chances of getting hired are very high. Suppose you watch this video till the end. In that case, I'm damn sure that some of the most important concepts would be definitely clear to you. In this video, after analyzing their previous interview process, I have compiled a list of 30 crucial technical questions covering operating system, database management, networking and OOPS. Make sure to stick around until the end, where I'll walk you through some of the most frequent asked data structures and algorithm questions, which are a key part of almost every interview. So without wasting any time, let's begin with the interview questions around the concept of operating system. So starting on with the very first question in our list, which is what is the difference between process and a thread? So this question is very commonly asked in nearly all the interviews. You can go on by saying that a process is an independent program in execution having its own memory space. Consider it like each Chrome tab that's running as a separate process. And if one tab crashes, it does not affect the other because it has its own memory space. While the thread is a lightweight process that share the same memory space. So consider within each tab, multiple threads work together. For example, one thread handles loading of a web page, another responds to your click. So as you can see on the screen, we are creating 2 processes with different process ID using fork, and we are using std thread for creating new threads. So moving on to the next question, which is state the different states of a process. So there are basically 5 states of a process, which are first, new. So in this, the processes are being created, resources are allocated and the process is initialized. It is a program that is present in the secondary memory that will be picked by OS to create the process. Second, ready. So after the creation of the process, it is loaded into main memory and is waiting for CPU time to execute. It is ready to run but not currently executing. Third, running. So the process is currently being executed by CPU. It is actively processing the instruction. Fourth, wait or block. The process cannot continue executing because it is waiting for another resource or an event, which is IO completion. Fifth, terminated. The process has completed its execution and is being removed from the system. Its resources are released and is no longer active. Question number 3, define spooling in operating system. So spooling in operating system refers to process of managing tasks by temporarily putting them into a queue before sending them to device like printer. So instead of waiting for one task to finish, system stores multiple tasks and processes them one by one, ensuring efficient handling of tasks. For example, when you print a document, it goes into a queue first. The computer handles the printing job at a time. So you can keep working while it prints in background. You can also say that spooling works on first come, first serve principle. Like print jobs are queued up and processed in the order they are received. Moving on to question number 4, what is a deadlock? So all the processes in system require some resource such as CPU, file storage, I/O to execute. Once the execution is finished, the processes release the resource it was holding. However, when many processes run on a system, they also compete for these same resources, which may arise a deadlock situation. So deadlock is a condition which happens when two or more processes get stuck waiting for each other to release the resource. For example, you are seeing on the screen, process 1 is holding resource 1 and is waiting for resource 2, which is acquired by process 2, and process 2 is waiting for resource 1. So you see, both the processes are in deadlock, as none of the processes are able to continue its work. So now talking about the condition which leads to deadlock. First, mutual exclusion. So in this, two or more resources are non-shareable, which means only one process can use one resource at a time, leading to other process going in a deadlock situation. Second, hold and wait. This means a process is holding at least one resource and is waiting for resource, which again leads to deadlock, when the other process is waiting to access the resource which is already occupied with the former process. Third, no preemption. This means that the process is not releasing the resource even its execution is done. Fourth, circular wait. As I mentioned earlier while I was telling you the definition of deadlock, the same example holds true for circular wait. Now moving on to question number 5, which is what is the difference between semaphore and mutex? So in operating system, semaphore and mutex are kernel resources that provide synchronization which is required when multiple processes are executing concurrently to avoid conflicts between processes using shared resource. A mutex, which is short form of mutual exclusion, and semaphore are both used to manage access to resource in a multi-threaded environment. Talking about mutex allows only one thread to access a resource at a time. You can also say it like as a lock and key. So if a thread has a key, which is a mutex, no one else can use the resource until that process gives back the resource. And only the thread that locks or take the mutex can unlock it. Now a semaphore can allow multiple threads to access a resource, which works upon signal mechanism. In this, a thread can be signaled by another thread. So it has two atomic operation, wait and signal. So when a process of thread finishes using a resource, it performs a signal operation, meaning it is telling the other resource that I have released the resource, you can come and take it. And when a process of thread wants to access the shared resource, it performs the wait operation. Now, moving on to question number 6, which is what is demand paging in the operating system? So a block, a page, memory page, or a virtual page is a fixed length continuous block of virtual memory. So demand paging is a technique used in virtual memory system where pages enters into main memory only when requested or is needed by CPU. In demand paging, the operating system loads only the necessary pages of a program into memory at runtime instead of loading the entire program into memory at the very start. So now you must be asking, what is the advantage of this demand paging? Firstly, it saves the memory. It only loads the data into RAM when needed. Secondly, it reduces the load time. Program starts faster because they really don't need to load everything at once. Let's see how it works. So first, page request. So whenever a program needs data that is not currently in RAM, it requests it, page fault. The system detects this request as a page fault and fetches the required page from the disk. Third, load and continue. The page is then loaded into RAM and the program continues using it. Moving on to question number 7, what is an IPC? So processes coordinate with one another using a method called inter-process communication or an IPC. This allows multiple processes to work together efficiently by sharing data and manage the resource so that each process gets the resource it needs. So now there are several ways by process communicate with each other. First, shared memory. So memory region that is accessible by multiple processes. This method allows process to communicate by reading and writing to a common memory space. So let me explain in depth the bounded buffer problem. The producer and consumer use shared memory to communicate. The buffer stored in this shared memory has a limited space. The producer places the items into buffer until it's full and then wait for consumer to consume some of the resources. The consumer checks the shared memory for the item, and if the buffer is empty, the consumer waits for the producers to add more. This shared memory approach ensures that smooth and synchronized production and consumption without overflowing or underflowing the buffer. Second, message passing. So message passing in operating system is a method used for communication between the processes. This technique allows processes to exchange information and synchronize their action without sharing memory directly. So how does it work? The sender process puts some message into a communication channel such as message queue, and then the receiver process retrieves the message from the channel. The figure you can see on the screen. So moving ahead to our second section, which is DBMS. Okay, question number 1. What are super, primary and candidate keys? Answering this question, I'll be taking an example of a student table with columns such as stud ID, email, phone number. Any combination that would uniquely identify a student can be a super key. We can say this as a superset of all the keys. Talking about primary key, so it is like a unique identifier for each student. There can be only one primary key and it cannot be empty. In this case, student ID is a primary key and it should not be null. Now, stud ID and email both can be a candidate key because they can uniquely identify a student, but one of them will be selected as primary key, for example, stud ID. So, moving on to question number 2, which is what are the ACID properties in database management system? So, ACID stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. The ACID property in totality provides a mechanism to ensure the correctness and consistency of a database. By atomicity, we mean that either the entire transaction takes place at once or does not happen at all. For example, when a customer transfers money from one account to another, atomicity ensures that either both the accounts are updated or neither account is updated. Talking about consistency, this means that the integrity constraint must be maintained. So, suppose you have 500 rupees and your friend has 300. Then after transferring 100 to your friend, the total amount should be consistent, which is 800. That is, before and after the transaction, the total amount should be consistent. Isolation refers that all the transactions should remain isolated from each other, and transfer between two should not interrupt any other transaction. Durability ensures that once the transaction has completed its execution, the updates and modification to the database are stored in and written to disk, and they persist even if the system failure occurs. The effect of transaction are thus never lost. Now, moving on to question number 3, which is what is transparent database management system? A transparent DBMS is a system where the complexity of data storage, retrieval, and management is hidden from the user, maintaining a security of the database, so the user cannot really know what is exactly going on into a database. The user interacts with the database in a very simple way without needing to know how data is physically stored and processed. Moving on to question number 4, which is define normalization. This is yet another very important question which you will face in many of your interviews. So normalization is a process of eliminating data redundancy, enhancing data integrity in the table, and helps to organize the data in database. So it is a systematic technique of decomposing your table to eliminate duplication and undesirable characteristics like insertion, deletion, and updation anomalies. So now let's understand the various types of normalization in detail. First, 1NF. So a table is referred to as being in a first normal form if the atomicity of table is 1, which means that a single cell cannot hold multiple values. For example, as you can see on the screen, Smith has 2 phone numbers, which is an anomaly. So in 1NF, we split this table to something like we will be adding Smith as toys and we will be adding the phone numbers in separate rows. Second NF. So the table is said to be in second normal form if it is already present in first normal form and the table is not possessing any kind of partial dependency. Now, what is partial dependency is something that you can refer to our DBMS video to understand in detail. Third NF. A table is in third NF if it is already in second NF, meaning there are no partial dependency and all non-key columns depends entirely on primary key. Second, no transitive dependency. This means non-key column should not depend on other non-key column. Every non-key column should depend only on primary key. So a table is in BCNF if first it is in 3NF and second, for every functional dependency A to B, there A must be a super key. For example, consider a table on the screen. Here for course ID, both course ID maps to instructor and student ID maps to course ID exist. But course ID is not a super key. So in BCNF, it would split into something like course table and student course, which ensure that data is well structured and it eliminates all the anomalies. 4th NF, and so there are two more, 4th NF and 5th NF, but we don't use 4 and 5 NF usually. Moving on to question number 5, which is write a query to create a view in the database. So views in SQL are kind of virtual tables that has rows and columns like table but doesn't store data on disk like a table. So as you can see on the screen, this particular query is used to create a view in database. So we will write create view and then give the view as a name and then select the columns from table you want to create a view, and then you can put the condition using where clause. Moving on with question number 6, which is what are the different type of joins? So in SQL there are 4 types of join, which are inner join, left join, right join and full join. So talking about the inner join, in which this query retrieves the record that have matching values from both the tables. Query for the same is there on the screen. Second, left join. It retrieves all the records from the left table and then matched record from the right table. And if there is no such value, null values are returned for the column from the right table. Right join or right outer join. It retrieves all the record from the right table and then the matched record from the left table, and if there is no such match, null values are returned. And lastly, full join or the full outer join. So this returns all the record where there is a match between table 1 and table 2. Question number 7, which is what is a checkpoint in DBMS? So checkpoint is like a save point in a video game and it temporarily saves the current state of database. So in case of failure, the system can restart from that point instead starting from the scratch. So this helps in faster recovery and ensures data consistency. So moving on to a third segment, which is networking. Question number 1, define HTTPS protocol. Hypertext Transfer Protocol secure is the secure version of HTTP, which is primary protocol used to send data between a web browser and website. So now you must be thinking, why HTTPS when HTTP was already there? It is due to this thing that Hypertext Transfer Protocol is encrypted in order to increase security of data transfer. This is particularly important when user transmits sensitive data such as logging onto a bank account, email service or health insurance. So in HTTPS, the main protocol which works together are HTTP and SSL or TLS, Secure Socket Layer or Transport Layer Security. Question number 2, different layers of OSI model. So the OSI or Open System Interconnection has 7 layers, each with a specific role in network communication. Starting off with the very first layer, which is physical layer. So you see it deals with all the hardware and physical connection, for example cables and switches. Second, data link layer. It manages data transfer between two devices on the same network, for example Ethernet. Third, network layer. It handles the routing of data between different networks, for example IP addresses. So you must be using your laptop or phone to listen me, which runs on separate IP address. Fourth, transport layer. This layer ensures data transfer with error checking, for example TCP. Fifth, session layer. It manages session or connection between devices, for example session control. Sixth, presentation layer. It translates data formats and encrypts and decrypts data, for example whenever you share some data. So this layer ensures the security of your data transfer. Seventh, application layer. So it is basically the interfaces with end user application, for example HTTP or FTP. Question number 3, what is the concept of load balancing? So to answer this question, let's consider a very simple example. Consider a website called Amazon. There are millions of users are accessing the site at the same time. If all the traffic goes to a single server, it will crash due to overload. So here's where the load balancing comes in. So a load balancer sits in between user and backend server, and when a user requests, for example searching of a product, the load balancer distributes that request to one of the available servers. As more users join, the load balancer ensures that each server gets an equal share of the request. So if one of the server becomes too busy or fails, the load balancer reroutes the traffic to other available servers, keeping the site running smoothly. Question number 4, which is what is IP spoofing? So IP spoofing is a cybersecurity threat where an attacker disguises their IP address by pretending to be another trusted IP. This is done to gain unauthorized access to a network or system, bypass security measures or hide their identity. So in simple term, it's like faking your caller ID when making a phone call. So the person on the other end thinks that you are someone else. So attacker uses this fake IP to trick the system into thinking that they are a trusted user. Moving on to question number 5, which is explain the purpose of DNS and how it works. So a DNS or a domain name system converts a human-friendly domain name like google.com into IP address like 142.250, etc. that computer uses to identify each on a network. And let's see how it works. Suppose you type a domain name, for example, example.com, into your browser. The browser sends a request to a DNS server to find the IP address of that domain. The DNS server looks up the IP address and sends it back to your browser. And your browser uses the IP address to connect to website server and load the page. So in short, DNS translates the domain name system into IP address for communication. Question number 6. What is a firewall and their function? So a firewall is a network security, either hardware or software based, that separates a trusted internal network from external network, which looks untrustworthy. It regulates incoming and outgoing traffic based on present security rules, and it does by inspecting data packets and determining whether to allow or block them based on various criteria, including source and destination IP, port number and protocol type, thereby filtering the network traffic, allowing only authorized and safe data packets. Moving on to question number 7, which is what is a VPN? So a VPN or a virtual private network is a service that secures your internet connection by creating a private tunnel between your device and the internet. So it hides your IP address, making your online activity anonymous, and encrypts your data, ensuring privacy and security, especially when using a public network. So a VPN works by encrypting your internet traffic and sending it through a secure server, which hides your real IP. This makes your online activity private, as it appears you are browsing from the server's location and not your own. So moving on with our last segment, which is programming questions. Question number 1. What is the difference between object and class? A class is basically a blueprint or template for creating objects, defining the structures and behavior like functions, the attributes, the data type the object will have. On the other hand, object is an instance of class representing real-world entity. As you can see on the screen, we have defined a class car with attributes such as brand and model, and a constructor with a method drive with a print statement. We have also created the object named as car1 and car2, then calling the methods with the object, so the output will be Toyota is calling, and for the second one, the output will be Honda Civic is calling. Second question, what is the difference between call by value and call by reference? We all know that function can be invoked in two ways, that is call by value and call by reference. The only difference is the type of value passed to them as a parameter. Talking firstly about call by value. So when using a call by value, a copy of argument is passed to the function, and changes made inside the function do not affect the original argument. As you can see on the screen, we have a function named as swap by value. You can see that the copy of values are passed as argument in the function, so it did not change the swapped value. So you will see only the change value inside the function, but when we are in the main function, the value remains unchanged. But if we see the case of call by reference, the function receives the address of the actual parameter, which allows the function to modify the arguments directly. An example of call by reference function is there on the screen. The function swapped by reference, in this case, x and y are swapped in main function because swap by reference modifies the original values directly through their references. So moving ahead with question number 3, we have what do you mean by method overloading? So method overloading occurs when multiple methods in the same class have the same name but different type of parameter. For example, the code on the screen, we have class printer, we have 3 functions with same name, print, each with different parameter like int, double and string. In the main, when we are calling the function passing arguments of different, then the corresponding function of that type is called. Question number 4, what is the difference between structured programming and object-oriented programming? Okay, so firstly talking about object-oriented programming or OOPS, this type of programming is built on classes, objects and their behavior. Following a bottom-up approach, this has enhanced code reusability due to concept of abstraction, polymorphism and inheritance. And talking about structured programming, a program's logical structures is divided into corresponding function. Following a top-down approach code, reusability is completely dependent on functions and loops. Question number 5. What are the different types of inheritance? So, inheritance in C++ can be classified into 5 types, which are single inheritance, multiple inheritance, multi-level inheritance, hierarchical inheritance, and hybrid inheritance. Talking about single inheritance, in this, child class is directly deriving from the parent class, and only one child and parent class is there. Second, multiple inheritance. In this class, a child class is derived from multiple base class. For example, there can be one or more than one base class. Multi-level inheritance. In this, a child is derived from a parent class which is also derived from its parent class. Fourth, hierarchical inheritance. In this, multiple child classes derived from a single base class. And hybrid inheritance, as I mentioned the types of inheritance earlier, inheritance consisting of multiple inheritance, for example, single, multiple or multi-level, is called a hybrid inheritance. Moving on with question number 6, which is what is a constructor. So constructor is a special method that is invoked automatically at time of an object is created. So it is used to initialize the data member of new objects generally. The constructor in C++ has the same name as the class or structure. It constructs the value that is provide data for the object, which is why it is known as constructor. Talking about the characteristics of constructor, so the name of the constructor is the same as the name of the class. And constructor are mostly declared public section of the class, though they can be declared in the private section of the class also. Constructor do not return values. Fourth, a constructor gets calls automatically when we create the object of that class. Moving on to last question, which is what is an abstract class. So an abstract class is the one where implementation of all the function cannot be provided in base class. For example, let us say animal be a base class in which we have a sound function, but it can't be implemented, so we'll assign the function sound to 0 with a virtual keyword making the class abstract. We cannot create object of the abstract class. So to understand it into better manner, let's see the example which is there on the screen. We can see that dog and cat class both inherit from animal class, and they will provide their own implementation of sound method. So the program creates object of dog and cat and calls the sound function, which invoke their respective implementation. So for example, when you will call dog.sound, then the output will be dog barks, and when you will call cat.sound, then the output will be cat barks.
Now moving forward with DSA question, prepare yourself with all the sorting algorithms such as insertion sort, bubble sort, etc. and understand their code and pseudocode. Moving on to array, searching and sorting, binary search, rotate array, maximum and minimum elements in array, missing number. In linked list, you may face questions such as insertion, deletion and search elements in linked list, merging of linked list, and lastly length of linked list and middle element of a linked list. In stack, you can get questions that support push, pop, top and retrieving the minimum element in constant time questions. For queue, you might face questions like implementation of queues using stack, in queue and dequeue. In trees, you might be asked the different type of trees and the height, diameter, top, left and right view of binary tree. You might not face very difficult questions related to graph, but prepare the theoretical concept very well. That's all from my side. If you have liked this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button for Intellipaat's YouTube channel. Thank you and see you in the next video.